Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you all to today's Kaapi lecture, Will Tigers Survive by Professor Uma Ramakrishnan. Kaapi with Curiosity is a lecture series which has completed 3 years now. Every month we have been having lectures in Planetarium, and ICTS has been bringing senior scientists to give lectures. Thanks to their effort, we are getting distinguished scientists coming here and then giving lectures, and all of us are getting to hear to those lectures. Apart from Kaapi lectures, ICTS has many other outreach activities. They have Einstein lectures, Vishweshwara lectures, then public lectures in ICTS, and also science activities in schools, and many more. Apart from these, other core activities of ICTS are high quality in-house research in ICTS, and also many special programs on different scientific topics. On earlier occasions, I have spoken about our popularization and non-formal science education activities. Today, I would like to mention about 2 new developments in Planetarium. Last month, we have launched a new show called Celestial Fireworks. This deals with different violent activities that happen in universe, starting from meteorites to Big Bang. And it also talks about recently discovered gravitational waves and contribution made by Indian scientists to it. And ICTS has done a lot of work in that, and it is there in our show also. I invite you all to come and see the show. Another program which we have initiated are a one-day program for underprivileged school children. We are inviting schools to Planetarium, and these children stay here from morning till evening. They will see our science park, they'll be seeing our shows, and also we'll be having demonstration lectures for them, covering experiments which are there in their syllabus, and also some experiments which are outside their syllabus. We are looking for volunteers who would be willing to come and explain these science park models and other models to children. If any of you are interested, I request you to send an email to us at info@taralaya.org. Already we are having some 2 volunteers, but we are looking for more. Today we have a distinguished scientist, Professor Uma Ramakrishnan, to give a talk about Will Tigers Survive 21st Century? A hearty welcome to you, madam. I extend a warm welcome to all of you here. I request Professor Vijay Kumar to introduce the speaker. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome on behalf of ICTS to another edition of Kaapi as well. So it's a great privilege to introduce Uma. Uma did her early education in Bangalore, bachelor's and master's, and then she moved to the US. She did a PhD at UC San Diego and a postdoc in Stanford, and then afterwards came back to Bangalore, India. And she has been at the National Center for Biological Sciences from 2005 onwards. So Uma's lab works on various aspects of conservation, in particular tiger, the survival of the tiger, and various methods that she has invented to understand how the genetic diversity of tigers is really getting affected. It's something that she'll, I'm sure, address in her talk. Uma is a very distinguished person. She won the Ramanujam Fellowship on coming back to India, the first Indian to win the Parker Gentry Award, which is given to people who have done significant work in conservation biology. She's an outstanding scientist of the Department of Atomic Energy. She has won that award. And last year, she was elected as a fellow of the Indian National Science Academy. So that's something which is fantastic. And one of my favorites, she's also featured in a book for children, 31 Fantastic Adventures, where this book features 31 women scientists working in various scientific disciplines in India, and really trying to highlight the case that you can be in India and do very good science. So we really look forward to Uma and her talk.
So thanks all for coming. Ooh. This mic is on a Sunday afternoon. And I just would start by pointing out that that's a cartoon. I never get that close to tigers. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here today. So also I should say that I probably won't answer that question. Will tigers survive the 21st century? Well, it's up to all of you and all of us. I hope that they will. Pretty sure they will, but it has to have a provocative title. So let's go back in time a little bit. If I say 1700s to you, what do you think of? 1700s, India in the 1700s. Anyone? Sorry? Green. What did you say? Sorry? You're taking away my punchline, but wait. Maybe don't a lot of us actually think about history, what was happening in terms of, the Mughal Empire was starting off and ending. Actually, Aurangzeb just died in early 1700. And then if we think of the 1800s, we're thinking about the mutinies, the British, the colonization of India, right? And then if we think of the 1900s, we think of independence, the iPhone, all of this stuff. But there was also a lot of other things happening in those times. And as our little friend said, this is India and Asia in the 1700s. That's forest cover, and that's how much space, if you will, was available to wildlife, biodiversity, which cohabits this planet with us. This is 1800, this is 1900, and this is 2000. So you can immediately see that, all the green is pretty much, a lot of it is gone. I've simplified this. This is a database called Anthrome, which maps people and their kind of footprint on the world. And you can see that, there's little bits and patches of what is left. You can so clearly see the Western Ghats. This is the break in the Western Ghats, the Palghat Gap, which is a historic biogeographic divide. And it's so amazing that this green actually tells you where the wildlife or where the biodiversity remains in India today. So the question then is, what's happening to this biodiversity? What's happening to the wildlife? They're now sequestered into these relatively small places, or are they? And are they going to then go extinct? You can imagine that, if all that green, all that area disappeared, and there's very little left, what might happen to the species which live there? So it's not just about the loss of habitat. The loss of green is a very broad scale thing. But if you actually quantify the ways in which humans have impacted the earth in terms of extracting things, changing the environment, in many ways, changing the cycling of nutrients by dumping fertilizers and so on. This is just the last 13 years. So this is after our, the 2000 I showed you. India really stands out as red. You can see the Himalayan chain. You can see the Western Ghats, highly degraded environments. Environments where there are actually a lot of people living together with biodiversity. So basically, it behooves us in India to really try and understand what's happening with the biodiversity, what's happening despite our human impacts, are they still surviving or not? And just to get another visual of that, this is a picture from NASA website of night lights, which is basically a proxy for humans, right? Where people live. And you can see again that even between 1992 and 2000, the growth of human populations is really large. You can see Bangalore, Mysore, Hyderabad, Bombay, Pune. You can see them all without knowing where they are, right? So in a sense, maps and these kinds of data communicate a lot to us qualitatively that we have impacted everything around us in India, and there's been huge growth in human population density. So what about tigers? What's been happening to them in this time? So we have seen that, this is in kind of yellow is the historical range of tigers, and in dark brown is an ambitious kind of distribution of current range, or where they still persist. And the suggestions are that tigers have actually lost about 93% of their range. So we're not talking about a species which is very specialized, very finicky, lives in only certain places. This animal lives from the Russian Far East, where there's snow, to the forests, rainforests of Sumatra in Indonesia, right? So it's a very flexible species, not very specialized, doesn't have very specific requirements, but still has been probably knocked out from a large portion of its range, and has also seen local extinctions. So the Caspian tiger, for example, went extinct in the 1930s. the Bali tiger in 1940, the Javan tiger in the 1980s, and most recently, the South China tiger in 1990s. What's really interesting is that now tigers from the Russian Far East are colonizing China again because they've recovered here, again showing the kind of robustness of the species in general. But we have lost already several tiger populations or kinds of tigers, if you will. Habitat loss is not the only thing which is obviously hammering tigers. It's a really nice picture from the National Geographic Collective showing the British Raj and hunting. There was a lot of hunting of tigers. Tigers were classified as beasts in early British descriptions, and there was actually a bounty for hunting them. You could get a reward for hunting them. You can imagine when, in the 1800s, there's so many forests, there must have been so much of wildlife, and it may have been conceived as a menace in some sense, right? And even today, that was, of course, a historic picture, there is a lot of ongoing trade of tiger parts. So, for example, tigers are used in traditional Chinese medicine. Tiger bone wine is used for several remedial processes. And so there is kind of this continued pressure. And if you go on eBay, people would probably pay $1 lakh for a tiger or even more, several $1,000s, right? So it is something which is still ongoing as a pressure. How much of it is happening? That's something which, we know there is some hunting and poaching, but definitely I don't want to communicate a negative image. India, right in the beginning, I should say, India has, the government particularly, has made huge efforts to conserve and, save tigers. So when does something actually go extinct, right? We use this word kind of very easily, but what does extinction actually mean, right? So extinction means, or let's talk about the stage just before extinction. When do we think a species will go extinct, right? Well, when there's very few individuals left, that's very obvious. Extinction means that there's 0 individuals left. When the populations become small and isolated, so when there's very few populations of these animals or whatever plants, and there could be different stochastic effects, chance effects, like a cyclone or something like that, which knocks them all off, then they have a high chance of going extinct. And of course, if exploitation or hunting of the species will continue, then also it might go extinct, right? So this is all kind of very textbook stuff, very trivial maybe. So how does someone who does science, like me, I'm a scientist, I'm not a manager, I'm not in Bandipur National Park wandering around and really saving tigers on the ground, right? I'm sitting mostly in my lab on a desk computer, writing. How do someone like me, and my students mostly do all the work, actually contribute to some knowledge about the species? Well, let's just break down those questions. So tigers are definitely, heading towards extinction. Maybe, maybe not. There's less than 5,000 probably remaining in the wild, but they're actually distributed across many countries. And right off the bat, India has a responsibility to the world. Why? Because 60 to 70% of the world's tigers live here. So if they are going to survive, they will survive in India, and it's our responsibility to ensure that they survive, right? Okay, but you would have heard a lot in the media last couple of months ago about tiger numbers. Tiger numbers have gone up. Yes, they have gone up. By how much they've gone up is debatable. They have gone up. There has been recovery of populations in certain places, but not everywhere. We'll talk about that a little bit later. That's just my caveat there. But as we continue on this development agenda and high GDP, what will happen? The remaining habitats which are left will continue to fragment, right? There'll be continued fragmentation, and this, or loss of habitat, the green will get less and less, and not just less and less, more and more far away from each other, right? And what happens because of that is the tigers' populations potentially become more isolated, right? So remember we said earlier that if you have isolated populations not connected to each other, that predisposes you to extinction. And we already have a situation where there are small and isolated populations. So the average number of tigers in any protected area in India is around 45 or 50. That's very small. It's a very small number. I'm sure all of you will agree with me, right? So though there are 5,000 overall, in any given park, there's very few individuals. Some parks have more, like Bandipur, Nagarhole together, for example. And of course, there are some places where there has been recovery. And so tigers are venturing out. And what might happen to them when they venture out? When they venture out of these parks, they may kill cattle, they may kill people, and they may also be then killed in return, in retaliation, right? So the exploitation or over-exploitation could continue as well. So I'm just trying to draw a parallel between those very general, reasons for possible extinction and the more specifics of what we see in tigers. So like I said, how can we as scientists, and that too, I'm a geneticist, so I work with DNA. We all have DNA, and we'll come to that in a bit. How can we actually attempt to answer or help with some of these questions? Well, I just said there's very few tigers, but can we actually count tigers with only their DNA, right? Can we find out how many tiger populations there are? There are different parks, but if those parks are connected, they become a larger geographic population, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that. And in order to do that, are they actually moving between parks? Can we actually see tigers moving through their genes, okay? And what happens then in isolated populations? Do we see these isolated populations? Are they really isolated? Or can we see the effects of that isolation? And finally, what happens when tigers actually venture out? Sorry, I went back. So these are quickly the questions I'll try to address with just small vignettes of the kind of work we've done. So like I said, I'm a geneticist, and all of you might have heard of this company called 23andMe. It's become really popular. You get it's quite cheap, $79. They have a vendor in India also. You just get a tube and you spit a lot of saliva into that tube, and you ship it to them, and they'll extract DNA from it. And every cell in our body, has DNA. It's like an instruction manual. The tiger's DNA is about 2,400 million letters long. Human DNA is about 3.4 million base pairs long, so longer a little bit than tigers. But anyway, so with this DNA, they can do all kinds of things, like they can identify who your cousins are, where you're from, what your ancestry is like, and so on. Really exciting to think that the story of your past is written in your DNA. You can't escape it, right? So the story of your past is written in your DNA, and similarly in the tiger's DNA. So all I need to do to understand those questions is just get access to the tiger DNA, right? And how do we do that? Before I jump into the results, we actually use this. That's tiger poop. It's dry, don't worry. There's no infections or no bacteria. Well, there's probably lots of bacteria, but you won't get any infections from it. And basically what happens is, when the tiger poops, basically each bolus pulls against the intestine and then comes out. And so on the top, for example, here, there's a lot of tiger cells, right? Inside, there's a lot of other prey cells. For example, if you can see here, there's actually a hoof of something, maybe a pig, which this tiger has eaten, right? So the poop actually has a lot of stuff from what the tiger ate. It has its prey, its diet, but it also has a bit of tiger, a little bit of tiger. And so if we can find this, we can actually get the tiger DNA from it without even seeing the tiger. So I don't often, of course we see tigers, but that's not what we're looking for. We're not looking to watch tigers. They're very beautiful and wonderful, but to answer our questions, we just want the tiger's DNA. Okay, so basically, our questions then are, can we basically identify individual tigers? Is there enough information in this poop DNA to identify tiger 1 from tiger 2 and so on? Can we actually find which tigers are more similar to each other than others? Can we see if they're moving between parks? Can we identify these isolated populations? And can we do something about this problem, which I'm telling you for sure is going to increase more and more? So like I said, it's really wonderful. Luckily for us, tigers also walk on forest trails. So if you've been to any forest in the Western Ghats, There's a lot of undergrowth sometimes. There's a lot of bush. And you might think, how do you go and find tiger poop in this place? But luckily for us, tigers also don't like thorns and all that. So they just majestically walk on the roads. And because they have territories, different individuals have territories, they mark their territories with their poop. Okay, so luckily for us, all we have to do is just walk on these wonderful, beautiful trails. Sometimes we can't even walk because there's too many tigers, like in Ranthambore or Kaziranga. Maybe there's danger from rhinos, and we have to just drive on bikes or in cars. And there, as we're walking along, we see a poop, and we can collect a sample from it. And like I said, most of the information we're interested in is on the top, right? Because that's where the tiger cells are. They're not so much inside. And so we just take a Johnson's earbud, put it into a buffer, close it up, and bring it back to the lab. That's simple, just this much, right? Just a few swipes, and that's enough for us to do all of our work. And then we come back to the lab. I'm just leaving out a lot of stuff here, but then we, specifically, yeah, oh, you have a question? Cells? Yeah, sometimes, but if it's dry, you're saying? Yeah, so basically, when it's dry, your yield sorry, will not be as high. The best kind of samples are fresh, where you can see the mucus glistening on the top, right? But something like this, we'll get DNA, but it won't be very good. So, for example, think of the genome as like a million-piece jigsaw puzzle, and you're putting together this jigsaw puzzle. So you might not get, in a good sample, you might get hundreds of pieces. In a bad sample, you might get 10 or 15, because the pieces may be torn up. So what happens, why is it bad? Because as soon as the cells are outside the body, there are enzymes which start chopping up the DNA. So the DNA is basically torn up, and so you don't have as much information. So yeah, so then we basically get these sequences where we're reading specific words in the tiger genome. And these sequences are basically very simple. Luckily for us, DNA has only 4 letters, yeah, A, C, T, G. So we just read A, C, T, G, C, C, whatever, and then we can compare different tigers and so on. So a long while ago, the first project I did was to actually, we collaborated with Ullas Karanth, who's a famous tiger biologist working in the Western Ghats. He was using cameras, to count tigers. So basically, the standard way you count tigers is you put 2 cameras across the trail, because the tigers are walking on the trail, and there's an infrared beam, and when the tiger crosses, the camera clicks, and it takes a picture of both the flanks, and it takes pictures all over the forest, and then you use a pattern recognition software to identify which are same or different, because each tiger also has unique stripes, okay? So then you can use this in some kind of a sampling framework to estimate the number of tigers in the park. So we said, if we want to test whether DNA can also count tigers, we should do it in a place where somebody knows how many there are, right? So as if you're investigating it scientifically, you don't, while it's nice to go to a place where you don't know the answer, where you don't know how many tigers there are, the first time you do something new, you want to go to a place where you know the answer, right? So luckily for us, since he was camera trapping, we were able to walk, collect scats, genetically identify individuals, and we captured, genetically caught them, and re-caught them. So basically, for example, you can see this individual was caught or sampled 3 times, whereas some others were sampled 4 times, and so on and so forth. And using this distribution of how many times an individual was caught, re-caught, and so on, you can estimate the number of tigers in Bandipur, okay? Yeah. Yeah, so the camera method claims that there are no errors, there's no misidentification, right? Yeah, so that's called detection. So they model something called detection probability, and all that is taken care of by the statistics. Yeah. So basically, we also have a misidentification probability. That is, what is the chance that 2 different tigers have the same genetic, profile based on whatever few pieces of the puzzle we're looking at. So yeah, so basically, in our case, this was vanishingly small. But that doesn't mean that there is no error. We have to state that is the error up front. Great question. Yeah. So then I'll move on to the second question of how many tiger populations are there? Like, is it that, so these are all the tiger reserves in India where tigers are. So each of them is a different population. Are they all like kind of cut off from each other? Or is there some things which are like, together? So we did this, and for this we actually used some newer methods, genomic methods, because we wanted to look at more pieces of the puzzle. And so we had to actually get tiger blood, which was very hard, because only very few institutes, only one institute in the whole country actually gets permissions to, radio collar tigers or dart tigers and so on. So I had to basically beg everyone who I knew had any kind of sample, pretty much promise to sell them my children, whatever it took. But I had to get the best sample that I could, right? And let's just go, this is probably very simple for you, but you can imagine that there's two different populations. They have slightly different genes. In this case, let's say the genes are red and green here and purple and blue here. They're different, why? Because they've been separated for some time, right? So over time, there are mutations or differences, spelling errors, which keep coming in the DNA, and so they become different. But if you have movement between populations, right, they'll be mixing. Just like you'd have 2 cans of paint and you mix them, the third can of paint will have elements of both colors. That's all it is, very simple. So what we did is, in this case, we sampled across these different parks, and I don't want to befuddle you with data, but I'll just show you this because it's so simple, you can understand it. So these are the tigers from different parks, Ranthambore. These are all southern Indian parks, you can see. These are from the northeast. This is the Tarai, and these are all central Indian tigers. So this is something called an unrooted tree, where we take all those sequences, align them, find the numbers of differences and similarities and all, and use that to build a tree, okay? And you can see immediately that, oops, certain things are clustering together. Now, I never told the program which built this tree that Satyamangalam is close to Bandipur, or Bandipur is close to Wayanad. I didn't. But genetics, just the genes themselves, sort out into this tree. So to me, I'm quite old now, and I've been doing genetics a long time, but still, every time this is just mind-blowing, that the structure of the land is mirrored in the DNA, right? And so you can see very clearly that Ranthambore is distinct from southern India, which is distinct from the northeast, from the Tarai, and from central India. And I'll just point out one more thing. See, you see how Ranthambore has these long common branches and short in the end, whereas central India has long branches separating. That is reflective of the number of spelling differences between the individuals here versus here. So immediately you can say, you would guess, anyone would guess, that the individuals in Ranthambore have very similar spellings, right? Whereas the individuals here have quite different spellings, because most of them have a long branch alone. These guys share mostly, and what they separate out by is short, right? Whereas southern India is in between these two, okay? We'll get back to that. So basically, what this is also saying is that central Indian tigers have a lot of genetic variation. They have a lot of genetic variation, and you can think of genetic variation as a, what's the word in, like a bank reserve money. There's a better word for it, I've forgotten now what it is. So yeah, so basically they have a high amount of genetic variation. So this is just another way to see that. You can again see that there's different clusters which show up. But basically, if you look at the statistically significant groups, Western Ghats is separate from Ranthambore, and all of these guys actually are one group together, but they do break into subgroups later as well. So that's good news, right? That's good news because it's not like every population is already isolated, right? Many of them are still connected because their genes are shared. Yeah. Yeah, so basically, why would you have high genetic variation? If there's lots of tigers and if there's lots of movement and mixing. So yeah. Yeah, so in this particular case, we've looked at 10,000 information bits. They're called SNPs. So we looked at 10,000, yeah, so not the whole genome. We've done that now, but I'm not showing that to you today. So yeah, so then back to this curious case of Central India, where there seems to be a lot of movement, right? There seems to be a lot of genetic variation and possibly connectivity. So let's go back to Central India, and just to highlight, I'm very lucky to work with a spectacular team of students. This is Prachi Thatte. Several years ago, she did her PhD in Central India, and she basically asked, really, are tigers really moving across these areas? What kinds of areas are they moving through, and what kinds of areas are they not able to move through, okay? And what we found basically was, we looked at this patch of Central India, we found lots of potential movement, and basically also we were able to identify that cities with lots of people and high traffic roads are bad for tiger movement. But everything else is okay. You don't have to have pristine forest everywhere. They'll move. If there's agriculture, they'll move, because they can move long distances, no? They're big things. But cities and highways are bad. And this is just to show you, for example, this is the landscape we looked at, Kanha, Pench. Pench is where Kipling wrote Jungle Book. It's an iconic park. And basically what happened, soon after this study was published, was there was a 6-lane highway sanctioned between Kanha and Pench. Okay? Remember, I just showed you that there was movement, right, between Kanha and Pench. So what was really nice was that our paper was used by a citizen to challenge this highway, to challenge NHAI, and in court, the court actually granted that the NHAI, the National Highway Authority of India, has to build an underpass, because by creating this highway, they will disrupt a natural biological process, which is the movement of tigers as they have always moved. So to me, that was really cool that, tiger DNA could be used to suggest a flyover. I mean, that seems like a very concrete thing, whereas sometimes these other things are very esoteric. So that was really, really nice. What we also did then, to be, again, a little provocative, was to do simulations of the future. So now, today, of course, there's already fragmentation, but I'm sure it's going to increase in the future. So this is going towards my title. Suppose you model the future, 2020. You see the colors are basically urban. So remember that the red and orange will not allow tigers to move, and the green and yellow will, right? This is 2020, 2040, 2060, 2080, and 2100. So you can see that the future is way more urban, right? And the predictions now are that something like 60% of India will be urban, right? Living in urban centers. Now, you can argue that maybe people will all move to the cities, so there'll be more space in the other places, but that's actually not what data shows. The impacts on other places is also very large. So now then, this is Central India. So that same, it's the same, it's like this square, okay? Actually, it's not all the way down, it's just here. I should have put a map to be clearer. Okay, so basically then, what we did also in this particular study is we said, okay, obviously we don't know the future. I have no idea what the future is going to be. So we modeled 85 versions of the future. If the future is this, what happens? If the future is this, what happens? What is extinction? Are tigers able to move? And we also wanted to model realistic scenarios. So for example, we found that opening up of mines in that area, which is going to happen, is going to be really bad for tiger connectivity. On the other hand, there are so-called corridors, which have been suggested already. And simply by protecting the corridors, making sure the corridors also don't become cities and towns, we were able to actually minimize, we saw that extinction was very low, right? So it's not like, you have to have more and more space for tigers, throw the people out, everywhere there should be only tigers, not necessary, right? So the point of this is to say that unless you look at alternative models, you don't know what your costs are going to be, right? So you can just say, oh, we won't think about the future. We'll just keep developing. We'll just keep building roads. And we'll hope for the best. Or, like we did, we'll mitigate, right? We'll build an underpass under the highway. Now, that is actually very expensive. That's an expensive way to go. Yeah, Bharat. Yeah. Right. So that's one of the other things which we actually modeled fenced reserves. So in fact, a lot of the IFS, the Forest Department, suggest managers that, it's such a problem with tigers moving out and all. So let's just fence the reserves and let's just move tigers around. Well, I think that's a zoo, pretty much. Yeah. Yes, for sure. So yeah. Sure. So actually, for now, based on what we find, we would say there would be no problem in doing that. There's no unique, variations here and there which make them only able to live there. Unique adaptations, we don't see any yet, right? But unless there's a need to, we may not feel, we may not need to do that. But yes, in the future, quite frankly, in the future, that's what we might have to do. So yeah, so anyway, what I was saying is that by just not thinking about the future, it doesn't mean that these things will not happen. And it's better if we can actually, instead of after the highway, going to court, so on and so forth, if we could work with people earlier on, like with NHAI or with other parties involved in development before, that would be actually much better. If all the stakeholders could talk about these things before, it would be better. So remember I showed you that population Ranthambore, which had very low variation. It's actually an iconic park, and one of my students is here, Kaushal, sitting at the back. He spent a lot of time there. It's basically really a beautiful place. A lot of people from all over the world come to see tigers there, but it turns out that they're actually very closely related to each other. So this is a population, this is an example of an isolated population where individuals are now getting inbred. I won't say more about that because we're doing a lot of work there now. We're trying to understand who's related to whom and how it's like a soap opera. We're trying to reconstruct all the relationships between individuals, but it'll take us a few more years to get a better handle on that. The last part is basically about tigers coming out, right? This is a really beautiful picture, I think. This is actually inside a park. These guys are not supposed to be in the park. They're cattle. If you think that parks are supposed to be for wildlife, actually there's a lot of people, cattle, and many things in our parks at least. And there's this tiger who's hunting a buffalo. But this is what leads to conflict. When people who live near parks have their cattle, they have their crops, and for example, elephants can just finish a whole year's of income in a few hours, right? It's very trivial for an elephant. And similarly, tigers can kill a lot of cattle. But there's compensation schemes, right? You can get money for a cattle which has been killed, if that was your cattle, but that takes long, and so on and so forth. And what the department tends to try and do is to basically remove and identify problem individuals. If that doesn't happen, then you have situations like this. This is a very hazy picture, but it's basically from a few months ago in Pilibhit, where villagers were so upset. They were so upset about this tiger, which had actually also killed a person, that they basically just killed it, right? So we don't want that situation, because then again, we'll go back into the over-exploitation. Sorry? They beat it, basically. Lots of them surrounded. It's easy for us to say, oh, this is so bad, but we are not the ones living there and losing our livelihoods, right? We're sitting here and we can't comment on their choices, I think. So we don't want these situations. And so basically, can we then use DNA to identify these problem individuals? Because if there are problem individuals, maybe they should be taken out. If there are habitual, human killing tigers, which I'm sure all of you heard about the case of Avni in central India, these tigers who people were trying to catch for very, very long, right? Then maybe they should be taken out. But do we really know which individual it is? Or are we just seeking out some individual without really being sure? So this is just a nice video which I'll show you. And I'm sure you can then guess how we can actually identify. This is a dead cow. And what's the tiger doing? It's licking, right? So when it's licking the cow, what's on the cow? The tiger's saliva, right? And saliva has DNA, right? So we can actually try to go to a kill site. This is some work which is ongoing with my student Himanshu, who's actually distributed these cards around Kanha, saying that, if your cattle has been killed by a tiger, call us immediately, right? And basically, they rush over there, and then they find tiger scat, jugular bite marks where the tiger has actually jumped and killed, hair on the various parts of the cow, lick marks, and so on and so forth. So this is now like a crime scene. Yeah, you have a question?
So how we can identify tigers who have killed the cattle, and if we've come across them one time or later, is that we have taken this DNA sample, and if we've kept it in our lab, if it's a buffalo livestock eating tiger, then what happens is that you can since the tiger might have left some saliva near the throat, which is its instinct to where it kills. Yeah. So usually big cats like lions and tigers take the kill place near the throat, as my mother told me. That
So that's the jugular bite mark. See here.
Yes, so they leave DNA of the saliva over there, and if we come across them
again, exactly, you're exactly right. And basically, you brought up a very important point, that the true killer is actually the one which has bit in the jugular. Okay.
So I mean that if we've come across the tiger before, that you can identify.
Yeah, that's also a very good point. You have to actually have some kind of a database of tigers already, right? You have to know, like, suppose I find some tiger DNA here, but if I just have a genotype, like suppose all of you left this room, and I went and I, swabbed all the chairs, I got all of your DNA, I might say that there are, 100 people in this room, but I don't know who is who, nah? Like if one of you was a problem individual, saying, then how would I catch you again? I need to have some database, which we don't have. You're very right. We don't have that. But what we're doing is, first of all, we're trying to see, can we even do this? Can we do this? Can we actually, who knows? Like, maybe there's no tiger DNA in that bite mark. It's just a small impression that you see. Can you actually, gorily stick a Johnson's earbud in there, pull it out, take it back to the lab, and do you actually get tiger, or you just get some cow? Because you could get only cow as well, right? So anyway, so this is something which is ongoing, and we have some pretty interesting results. For example, it seems like several other individuals may actually come and eat from that prey afterwards. But we always consistently get a single individual at the bite mark. So, for example, other individuals don't come and lick it or something like that. There's no contamination of this particular source in terms of DNA. So anyway, this is ongoing. And we're nowhere near, say, handing it off to the forest department to say, here's your DNA kit. Just go and find out who it is. No, not at all. But we have to start somewhere. And like he said, we'll also have to work very hard to build databases of individuals. So I started off with these questions. Can we count tigers using DNA? Yes, for sure. And quite frankly, we haven't done too much of this again, because the counting of tigers is a national enterprise. And it is kind of done by the Forest Department, the National Tiger Conservation Authority, and a lot of independent scientists don't participate in that. But we have tried these methods in other places, and they work well. How many tiger populations are there? Well, between 3 and 4. There are several connected populations, like in central India. But for tigers to move between parks, they do need the right situation. the right lay of the land, they will not be able to move across highway. So by the way, I just wanted to point out one more thing about that underpass example. I talked up the underpass and said, so wonderful and all that. But the reality is, nobody told the tigers the underpass is where they're supposed to cross. So, tigers are still crossing the freeway and dying, the highway, and they're dying, right? Maybe they'll learn. If there are other groups who've put up camera traps near the underpass to see whether they do use it, there doesn't seem to be a bias. They do use the underpass. It's not like they don't like it. It seems like ungulates, that is deer and all, don't like it. They don't use that underpass. So other things, maybe it works for tigers, but it may not work for everything, okay? And it might take some time for animals to actually learn that there's significant risk of crossing the road, right? Because vehicles are going very fast, but none with the underpass. This is an exciting area which we are hoping to continue later, but understanding what happens in these isolated populations, there's basically inbreeding, and we all know that inbreeding is bad. Why? Because when me and my relatives tend to have very similar bad mutations, and so if we mate with each other, those mutations surface, and so several deleterious effects may come up. Yeah, you have a question?
I mean, we do know inbreeding is bad based on a lot of studies, but in the wild, earlier, when we hadn't done these kind of studies, there must have been a lot of inbreeding going on.
So I don't know about that. There may have been some, and that's also important for us to understand. But basically, I think what's happening now is, so there may have been some inbred individuals and some individuals who are not inbred. But there was always some not inbred individuals. But if you look at, say, parks like Ranthambore today, everybody is inbred. Yeah. So, but we don't see any effects yet. Yeah. So that's something which we have to study further. Yeah, they're still fine. They're absolutely fine. But there are other species like Florida panthers and cheetahs where there have been, I'm talking about cats, documented effects of inbreeding in the wild. So what we are doing, for example, here is, in this case, we are actually advising, so the forest department, for example, is moving individuals. They're planning to start new protected areas in Rajasthan, and they are moving individuals. So we are, for example, telling them which individuals are the least inbred, since they don't want to move anyone from outside of Rajasthan. And finally, we're starting this to try and identify conflicting or problem individuals. So like I said, we have provided recommendations for mitigation. We are helping the forest department here, and we're trying to engage with managers to come up with better strategies. So just to leave you with a few pictures in the end, I mean, this is Kaushal here, actually, he's sitting at the back over there. But this is from Ranthambore. And we often go in teams of 3 or 4 people. We never go alone. And this is some sample collection happening here. There's a lot of mysteries open. That's the best part about being a scientist, because the more you study, the more you realize how little you actually know. And this is a very beautiful tiger. You were interested in striping patterns. This is called a melanistic tiger. It's actually not melanistic. A true melanistic individual is completely black, like the black leopards, like Bagheera and Jungle Book. This individual has something off with its stripes. It's as if someone dropped black paint on it, right? And these individuals are found only in Simlipal Tiger Reserve in Odisha. So again, this may be a case of isolation, inbreeding, and increase in this phenotype, which was not there, doesn't seem to be there anywhere else. We have a lot of leads on that, but maybe that'll be another talk in a couple of years. Many, many mysteries, like why do they have these spots on the back of their ears? So, when you ask me questions, I actually don't know most answers. I'm always wondering about things like this. What is this that they spray? So there was an old study by a gentleman from Kolkata who suggested that tiger urine smells of basmati rice. And so we're now actually starting some work on trying to sample this. Now this is much more complex because it's volatile, which means it evaporates fast, and it's chemicals. So it's no longer 4 letters, but like a wide variety of things which are possible. So can we actually not identify individuals, but can we distinguish males from females just based on the spray? which we analyze in the lab. And you might ask, like, okay, why bother? You know, there's so many things going on in India. We have so many developmental issues, so many issues, many issues. So why should we really bother to save tigers? I mean, one reason is, of course, people really love tigers. There's a picture I took of all these people watching a tiger. And you can see something on everyone's face. I mean, they're so excited. And I really hope all of you have maybe seen tigers or will go into the wild and see them. And tourism contributes tremendously to local economy. So it does help. I mean, there's much better ways to do it and all, but it does contribute to local economy. It provides people with a livelihood as well. From a strictly ecological and perspective, scientific perspective, tigers are top predators, like this example of a wolf, and they're present in these cascading systems. When you remove the top carnivore, you remove the top predator, the whole ecosystem tends to collapse. This is what happened in Yellowstone National Park. When they reintroduced the wolf, so many things recovered because they're all controlling each other in these checks and balances. And so these kinds of cascading impacts even impact us. So for example, when the large herbivores are gone, small mammals like rats increase, and then the spread of disease increases. So you might think that it doesn't matter, but it really does even affect us if we lose these large and beautiful things. Just another picture in Ranthambore. This is one of the chowkis where we often stop and eat and so on. And of course, I haven't done much at all. All of this is work by my fantastic lab students, Prachi, Meghna, Anubhav, Vinay, who's working on the melanistic tigers. This is the field team in Ranthambore, Kaushal, who's here, and Himanshu, who's very brave because he goes to these cattle carcasses. Once he was approached by Gorakshaks asking what he's doing with the cattle. And many of these cattle, they're infested with worms and stuff. And they do sample them, a lot of maggots. In fact, he fell sick even once. And of course, a lot of this work is very expensive, and we have a lot of support for it. Thank you. Thanks. Oh, I had to show this slide, which my younger daughter made, who's not here, but she wants to say thank you. Thank you for listening to me. And I can take more questions if there are.
Yeah,
and you're welcome to.
Thanks a lot, Uma. So before we move on to the questions, I'd like to request the Planetarium director to hand over a memento. On behalf of both ICTS and the Planetarium.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
So we open for questions. Please, there are 2 mics if you are close to one of them.
Yeah, and you're welcome to come and see the tiger scat. This is from Kanha, from Central India.
You said that India has roughly 40 to 50% population of the tigers in the world.
No, 50 to 60.
50 to 60.
Yeah.
And the map that you showed for the forest, if you look at the forest
habitat is much less.
It's much less. It's
Yes.
much more towards the
Southeast
Cambodia,
Asia.
Vietnam, and
Yeah,
all
yeah,
those
yeah.
countries. So why is that disparity there?
Okay, so basically a lot of Southeast Asia is empty forests. There's a lot of hunting. There's been a lot of loss. The tiger densities are very, very, very low. Tigers are very simple. They need prey. So there's a very beautiful paper by Ullas Karanth which shows how many prey a tiger needs. And basically, if you have more prey, you have more tigers. So these forests, many of them are empty because of hunting of prey, not necessarily hunting of tigers. And if there's no prey, there's no tiger. So there's more area. But our systems in India have high productivity. Like you go to the Western Ghats, you see so many deer, sambar, gaur and all. There's a lot of high density of prey, and so we have lots of tigers.
Hello.
Yeah.
So my question is, once you collect the scat sample or the urine or
Right,
saliva, right?
right.
So how much time does it actually take to finally come out with the DNA of that individual?
So the DNA extraction, so basically what we do is just extract the DNA first. That doesn't take much time at all, maybe a day or few hours. Yeah, it's very fast.
Okay.
But then doing the other genetic analysis does take time. So if you're thinking, for example, of how can, say, a manager, identify from a kill site, they don't have the labs and all there. So, I'm not sure, but it does take maybe a week if you do it really fast, yeah.
And the cost involved?
The cost. cost is, so right now, that's what we've been also working to develop methods to make it cheaper.
Yeah.
And as of now, it's about 1,000 rupees to identify an individual tiger.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. One sec. Yeah. Yeah.
What is your advice for the people who start genetics as a career for the beginners?
Oh, it's a fantastic area because I mean this is the age of genomics, right? Personalized, not just for tigers. I'm sure you've been seeing all the stuff in the newspaper about the ancient DNA work with the Hadappans and understanding history, how basically our ancestry. Of course, our ancestry is cool for us, but it also tells us what diseases we're predisposed to because me and all my relatives have been through the same history. So there's a lot. I didn't say that right, but genetics impinges on several fields, whether it's anthropology and understanding our past, whether it's the medical field. And I think there's a huge potential. And now there's this whole field of active genetics, where you can actually modify genes with this CRISPR technology. And there's a new institution in India called the TIGS, Tata Institute of Genetics and Society, aiming to decrease the burden of malaria by creating mosquitoes which don't transmit the malaria parasite, right? So it's coming in every walk of life. In agriculture, I think there's a huge potential for genetics in the future. Sorry, I didn't hear.
One more question.
Hello.
Yeah.
How far we can go from the by looking at my DNA? How many years we can go back?
Yeah. So actually, it's easier to go back further. Very recent past is not very easy. But you can look, I mean, it depends on the question. So for example, I did my 23andMe profile, and I'm 3% Neanderthal. So that's like really old, right? I have 3% of my genes, whatever, admixed with Neanderthals, which many of us in this room will have, right? So you can look at various things depending on, what the question is. But very recent things will not potentially, they may have an epigenetic signature in terms of markings on the DNA, but maybe not in terms of changes in DNA.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, hi.
I'd like to know, as the urbanization increases,
correct,
can we not create wild environment?
Yeah.
Is it possible to do that so that we can increase wildlife?
So that's a hard question because, it's, again, like I said, easy for us to sit here in Bangalore and say this. But what about most parts of India have people? So what about the rights of those people? I mean, there's no place which is empty.
Of land.
No.
No. Empty land which can be made wild artificially.
Yeah, maybe. So, okay. So I think what you're talking about is there's a whole new field called restoration and rewilding, okay? Yeah. Where the idea is that, for example, now there are invasive species like lantana, which are, sweeping across the landscape. And they're completely changing ecosystems. So we need to restore them. We need to scientifically get them back to a state which they were in. When, I don't know, that's a choice we make because ecosystems have changed over time. But, and then we could potentially introduce wildlife and all that. I just feel that that's a very managed, that's a very human, it depends on us. I don't know, I hope that some of these processes can exist naturally without so much of intervention from us, because something like that is very subject to chance things like governments change, funding changes, but we need to have a commitment which is long term. If we can have that, nothing like it. I think you had a question. Yeah. Yeah.
Of mapping you're using.
Yeah. So we've actually, So we have, sorry, I'm just holding this, but I didn't show it, we have not published it also, but we've created just recently a reference genome for Indian tigers, and we're using that for all of our work. We are doing NGS, next generation sequencing whole genomes. We've sequenced about 60 tiger genomes now, and that's what we're looking at. That's how we're looking at inbreeding and stuff, because we're looking at how much of variation there is and how it's distributed and all. But it's all very expensive, so we'll see how much we can do. Thank you.
Hi. So the last, so you're looking for like personality traits, like the problem individuals. So are you like comparing genomes and then looking for specific genes that are common?
No,
or?
not at all yet. Okay, so I just, because it's a public talk, I use, the term problem individuals is used in literature, but basically what we are seeing so far is it's probably very ecological. That is, cattle is prey, as is deer. The tiger is not differentiating necessarily between them. When the density of cattle is high enough that it's better to hunt cattle than to hunt deer, that is what a carnivore will do, right? So are all carnivores the same, or do some individuals, are they more predisposed to kill cattle? That we don't know yet. My guess is I don't think it's like that. I think it's just about opportunity. But that's just a guess. That would be very interesting to understand. Yeah.
The models that you've built and
yeah. Simulation models.
Simulation models and the other population models or the patterns that you've observed in tiger. How specific are they to tiger? Is there a potential to extend the study to other?
Oh, yeah. So basically the work we did with tigers for the future simulations, what that is modeling is basically landscape change, right? So you take a swatch of land, divide it into pixels, and you have a probability of the change of that pixel from forest to road, to this, to that, whatever, right? And so then you superimpose the tigers on it, like a video game, like an individual-based model, where they're moving across, and how they move. If this is forest, I'll move. If it's not forest, I might die or whatever, right? So it's very simple, and it can be, by changing the parameters, you can apply it to any species. Yeah. Right? Information, yeah, exactly, which is actually often lacking. Yeah, because we don't know, we know this for tigers now, but we don't know what is like a resistance for other species. In fact, the original models for this are resistance connectivity models, where a population is basically a node which outputs current, and the current flows from node to node. And what's in the middle provides resistance. If it's forest, it'll provide low resistance. If it's road, it'll provide high resistance.
Hi.
Yeah, hi.
So with all the research that is going in genetics,
correct,
or I'm not technically aware
That's
of
fine.
the terminologies. Is it possible to modify the genes of tigers so they don't harm humans? So the entire problem is solved with that.
But then they're not tigers, no? If
Yeah,
they're
but
not
they're
carnivores,
just not harmful for humans.
I guess
Every
so.
other,
I mean, yeah, maybe it's possible, but I don't think they're particularly harmful to humans. I guess it might be possible in the future. I would never say nothing. It's not possible. But usually, understanding the genetics of behavior. See, like when you're talking about the genetics of, say, skin color or eye color, that's a bit easier, but behavior is very complex. And it probably involves many genes and understanding the genetics of behavior. So when you have many things which interact, you can get many outcomes, like depending on whether you have A here, A2 here, etc., etc. The combination of things is very vast. And so your ability to control an outcome becomes much more difficult, much harder. That's the technical answer. Emotionally, I hope that we don't get there, but yes, maybe it's possible, yeah.
So can we predict future looking at the DNAs?
No. I mean, in the sense, I guess, for example, if there's a selection pressure, say, that, certain environment where that certain individuals with a certain DNA sequence will do well and others will not do well. And the environment changes. Before it was such that everybody's doing well, and who will do well under a specific environment, and if that is the environment, then you can. But for example, in all of our models of the tigers, we're not modeling how their genes are changing. We're just modeling how the land is changing and are they moving or not. We use the DNA there just as an index of are they moving or not. Yeah.
And all the database that you would have built looking at the DNAs, is it available for public? Can we access it?
We've not done that yet, but we are definitely going to do it with Ranthambore, because here, we've followed individuals and we've collected samples, so we have that database where we have individuals and their DNA. And these are all famous individuals, like Machli the tigress earned over $1 million or something in her life because everybody loved her and everyone came from all over the world to see her. So then we can start building those kind of databases. And I think that's also an amazing tool for science communication because it's different, when you go and you see some tiger, and then you can actually see, oh, this is related to this individual, and this one has high variation or low variation or whatever. You can link it back to the science. So yeah, we hope to do that, but it might take a bit of time.
Yeah, thank you for this lovely talk, for weaving this, this topic of tiger conservation, which captures the public imagination with something quite pure science as genetics. So thank you first.
Thank you.
Okay, my question is this. Okay, tigers and the problem of conserving tigers seems to be an Asian issue. So is there something to take away from other big cats that might have been conserved or not, or have been studied in other places? Because other places are could be more resource rich.
Yeah. That's a fantastic thought. And basically, what has happened to let's look at Africa. So in Africa, they're lucky. Africa, South America, they have still huge protected areas. Kruger National Park, okay? All of India's protected areas together, if you sum them up, it would just be 3 times of Kruger National Park, one park in South Africa. So they have large land, right? And then this whole problem of, 45 animals and all goes away. This is a problem because we have small space and small number of animals because of small space. But for example, if you think of the puma, right? In the US, it's already living in a very fragmented space. And again, I wanted to point out how resilient these species are. There are pumas who live in Los Angeles, no? So they don't need some very pristine forest or whatever. But this problem of fragmentation is global. And oh, by the way, do not think that biodiversity loss is limited to India. There are studies coming out across the world. Species are declining despite investment by governments and so on. There's just not enough space. Even those places are not enough. So I think, I mean, that's a long-winded answer, but basically we will have to continue to keep jumping, trying to understand, managing, and have that interface.
Yeah, I have a few questions actually.
Okay.
Has there any study being done, regarding climate change and what is going to happen to tigers? The other question was, you were showing the flyover. And I would imagine roads of that size, the cost of actually chain link fencing on the road is actually quite small compared to the cost of the road itself. So you can, chain link the sections that are not raised.
Correct.
So then you can force the animals to go through the elevated sections. That should not be very difficult. Yeah. And the other question I had was the evidence you have for the tiger that has traveled the maximum in India. What is that distance?
Oh, that's about 500 kilometers.
From
but that's
where to where?
It's not an individual. It's an indication from genetics. So the best way to get that type of data would be if you have a radio-collared animal and you see it moving. That kind of data is there in the Western Ghats, Bhadra to Bandipur or something, about 200 or so kilometers. But our genetic studies suggest movement of up to 400 or 500 kilometers. So the first question about tigers and climate change, I think people tend to dismiss effects of climate change on species like tigers because we think of climate change as having massive effects in temperate areas where it's colder. But actually India, a lot of ecosystems in India are not very well understood. We call all of this as forest, but actually a lot of it is savanna, which is forest grass mixture. And the transition between forest and savanna could be tipped by climate change, by drought, by changes in rainfall and so on. And the ability of forests or savanna to support prey, how many deer, etc., could affect tigers. So that's how I would see climate change impacting tigers, by changing ecosystems in India through changes in climate. The second, the chain-linked fences, that's exactly what they do, for example, in Canada, in a place called Banff, where they are basically funneling individuals. They can only get out there. I think, again, this might be hard because, all of our people who live around the park are accessing the park. They're coming into the park to collect firewood. They're using it in many ways. Tendu patta, major thing in central India. So how to allow them and not exclude them is something which we have to think about.
And things like
yeah, maybe. But yeah, it is an option. Yeah.
an option.
Yeah. But you know, for example, in Bandipur recently they put these very like these thorn-like things to stop the elephants from coming out. But it didn't work. I mean, the elephants just walked over them and some died and so on. So we have to study, also to think also about how animals will react to them, behavior, something which we know very little about, but yeah.
If you have forest corridors between isolated populations, how wide do they need to be?
I don't think we know the answer to that question. We can see a corridor on the map and mark it out, but do the animals understand that's how they're supposed to move? I don't know. So it has to be attractive to pull them in a way, right? For example, with elephants, this is the problem because elephants are moving all over the place. So they don't know what is a corridor. You're calling it a corridor just because you see forest there or you see what we call structural connectivity. That is the structures which should allow animals to move, but behavior of animals is complex and they may...
And you said there was a lot of inbreeding in Ranthambore.
We can take this over coffee if you don't mind. So let's have a last question and then we can go over discussion.
We'll talk more later, yeah.
Thank you very much. I would
Thank
like
you.
to start by thanking you
Oh,
for an outstanding talk and for a
thank
very insightful research that you are doing and that you are coming back to India to do this research.
I couldn't be anywhere else.
Yes, I know. I came to India myself in 1972 as part of the Tiger Project, or Project Tiger by Indira Gandhi.
Oh my.
And I worked at the Kanha National Park.
Oh, fantastic.
And at that time, India was a very different place.
Yeah.
I recently heard by an Indian scientist who told me that by 2050, the population of India, which is the largest population in the world,
yes,
will have grown from 1.3 billion, which is more than the Chinese, to 1.7 billion. We already have now great difficulties with wildlife Indian conflict. And we heard our gentleman suggesting that we may genetically engineer tigers so that tigers are being changed.
Yeah.
And I would like to ask a question whether maybe it is time to change people.
All right, that's a great comment, I guess. And I think we all do need to change. I think Greta Thunberg, I mean, she's inspiring me to think that someone so young can be, in some sense, so wise and really saying it like it is. I think we all need to change. I just feel that we shouldn't put the onus of that change on people who don't have choices. Yeah, we should change. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Very nice.
Thanks, Vijay. Yeah.
So on that positive note, let's thank Uma for a wonderful talk. So it's been very, very nice to